been through the Rambam's introduction to Parak Chelek, which is all about Agadata and all about the afterlife. And right at the end of it, you have the 13 principles, the 13 Ikar Munah, which we did a whole introduction to last week. We made a start to it. We looked at the first one. So just to recap, the first thing we mentioned was very interesting is that the 13 Ikar Munah are held up very much today as being sort of the what defines Orthodox Judaism. There's a very good book by Joshua Berman, an Imam, where he one of the interesting things he shows is that this is a relatively recent phenomenon. That what used to be regarded when you had halakhic stuff about what's considered someone who's in and out of the fold, who's considered a kofar, whose Sefer Torah can you use, whose shkita can you use, it used to be all taken from Hilchot Teshuvah. It was never based, whereas the 13 principles were used as part of tefillah, they were used as part of the tendencies of Yudah, the part of tefillah, they were never seen as halakhically binding. That's changed the last 120 years. So one thing it's chapter 10 of my Talmudic claims are sort of moving that into the field a little bit, is that what is the difference between these two different sources? Why are there two different sources? Well, tefillah generally is much more succinct, brief summaries, or heads of Rashi Paratim, as he likes to call them. And so he said that the Rambam himself tells us he has two different methodologies when he's writing Mishnah Torah and when he's writing the Yibum Ikarim. Mishnah Torah, he writes to the rabbis of Montpellier, when they're after they're challenging about his sources. He says, my project's very simple. All I'm doing is I'm taking clear Talmudic conclusions and I'm writing them down. Anytime there's a Kiddush, I point out Yira'eli or Kachnireli or he's got a few sort of terms that mark out where he thinks he's saying something that isn't clear. Everything else, you can just find the sources very simple. So obviously it was simple to the Rambam, but necessarily simple to everyone else. The Kesef Mishnah, the Maggid Mishnah, everyone sort of tried to write out what the sources were. There were disagreements about it, but either way, the Rambam's project in Mishnah Torah was writing out what he considered to be clear Talmudic conclusions according to the tradition that came from the Ikarim. Whereas when it comes to the 13 principles, he says something else. He says, this is at the end of the 13 principles, he says, if you don't understand something I've written here, don't take it lightly, because I've spent a long time being ma'ayen, thinking about and analysing it and working out what I think is right about these principles of faith from many different sources, presumably Jewish and non-Jewish sources, knowing the Rambam. And this is what appears to me to be correct. So to me, you see straight out a different approach. One is Rambam's opinion as a lawyer, a lawyer giving a legal opinion of what he finds in the principle. This is Talmudic precedent, therefore this is what I'm going to paskin. Whereas the 13 Ikarim of Rambam as a philosopher saying, this is, when I take all the sources, when I think about these principles of faith, this is what appears right to me. And there are a couple of differences we noticed straight off last week. One is that in the 13 principles, in the Hilchos Teshuvah, you only get kicked out of the community, and you get called a minu and a Ikar, one of these things, if you positively make a statement. Ha'omer, someone who goes up and says, there is no God, or God's going to bother you, or Torah is not min hashamayim. Meaning, there's discussion about what happens if someone's in doubt, or someone is a quiet heretic. Taking the Rambam at face value, and there's debate about how much to do this, but taking Rambam at face value, which many people do, someone who stays quiet about being in doubt, you don't have to start worrying about his shkita, about anything else. You go with it. Only if he sets himself out from the community and says, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in Torah money, then you start being worried. Whereas, because that is how it appears in Parak Chelek, that is how the Talmudic precedent is. Ha'omer says the same thing. So Rambam as a lawyer will bring down the Talmudic source as law. Rambam as a philosopher, well, there's plenty written about it, but the Rambam believes, based on the ideas at the time, that in order to get Olam Haba, your seichel, your soul, has to be perfected a certain way, and any incorrect belief could be barriers to you connecting to God, to you getting Olam Haba. So someone who doesn't have these correct beliefs, according to the 13 principles, is not getting into Olam Haba. But Rambam as a lawyer, as a posek, isn't going to write that. So that's why we find the difference between the Teshuvah and the 13 Ikarim. What's another one we saw? Well, I don't know, leave it at that. So we had the first Ikarim Munah. We talked about believing the existence of God. So existence of God in Mr. Torah and the Psat is very simple. Someone who says that God doesn't exist, or that God doesn't exist as a manhig, someone who providentially rules the world, someone who positively states that, he's out of the fold. He doesn't have Olam Haba. That's all he says about it in Hilchos Teshuvah. Whereas we saw in the 13 Ikarim, he gets into all philosophical discussions about what does the concept of a God mean? The necessary existence, contingent existence, we're going to go into all that again, but for the Rambam's perspective, if you've got an incorrect perception of what God is, it's something we're going to come back to in the other Ikarim now, so I'm recapping it. If you think there's a God who's providentially managing the world, but he's not a necessary existence, or he's not a monarch, for example, with Aristotle, he says there's no providence. If he's no providence at all, or one of the other thoughts, then Rambam would say, as he does in the Moreh Nevuchim, you're governing too, you're perceiving a figment of your imagination. Because what you think God is not what God is. So that Rambam writes that with his philosopher's hat on in his Ikar and his Hanzal. When he paskins halacha in Mishnah Torah, he paskins when he finds in the Gemara, and the Gemara doesn't make any distinction between that. The Gemara just says, if you believe there's no God who's manhig the world, then you're out of the fold. So that's all the Rambam writes. So we see there's a pattern, and in that book I get to a lot more, these different projects that the Rambam has, the different hats he wears, and he puts together different ones of his works, very much influences the way he presents certain things. Look at the Yisar Hasheni now, which is the Yichud Hashem Yisparach. So what does it mean, the unity of God, there being one God? Right, go on. It's not a quick question. Yichud Hashem. What does Yichud Hashem mean? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. We say it quite often. What does it mean? So, very, very simple. That build up from a simple start. It just means there's one God. There's not two. There's not three. There's four completely out. Sorry. So, Jewish way of putting the question, but
I would also add to that it's not just that there's only one God and there were two or three gods, but also it's not just one God and no other forces could compete or go against.
Oh, very good. You're getting into some of the discussion there. Whether it's this or the next one. Yeah, on a very simple level, and again, the way the Rambam puts it in the Torah, it's a purely numerical thing, and because that is all you find. There's one God, and someone who worships and believes there's multiple gods, according to the Gemara, is out of the fold. That's Avodah Zarah. So the Rambam, as a posek, is only going to bring down Racha while he finds the Gemara. So that's what he brings, and that's it. But as we know from the Moreh Nevuchim, from very other places, the idea of God's unity is something which Rambam gets very, very excited about. And therefore, it's surprising actually, he only has a few lines about it here. But what does it mean? Okay, before you get to the Rambam, someone like Rapash, for example, he also takes it very simply. Even philosophically, he says we can't. Rapash's big thing is that even philosophers, however much they philosophize, can never understand more about God than a child or anything else, because God is so far out of anything we can understand and comprehend. Trying to bring truth this way or that way, or trying to make clever arguments back and forth, that's not going to get you anywhere. Take what you find in the Torah, and that's it. That's a helpful approach. Because somewhat enough from the little I've read, but I'm going to take what you find and don't try and bring truth to understand more. So Rapash's whole point is, he takes even a step further than that. He says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, means that when I look at the world, I need to look at the world and treat it as the creation of a single entity. It's all been planned, it's all been created together and all interconnected as a product of one entity. I can't know what I'm approaching as God. When I approach the world as a human being, I can look at the world through the perspective of it all being planned and determined and some sort of master plan from one entity. That's the way Rav looks at it. The Rambam, it's much more complex than that. It's not just a numerical matter of one God, two gods, three gods. For the Rambam, there can't be any what we call multiplicity. inside. Shenami Shazet, Shisibat HaKol Echad. Ve'enai Ke'echad HaZug. Ve'lo Ke'echad HaMin. So it's not one, when we talk about there being a whole shelf of fruit and I'm just picking up one apple. There's one out of many. And not when we talk about, say, one person, because one person you can subdivide into arms and legs and other things. So that's not what we mean by God being one. We mean one means united, singular, simple. So this is his big point, that not just echad meaning one, but achdus meaning singularity and simplicity. And why is that? Because for the Rambam, the first point is that physicality is something which can always be subdivided and subdivided, subdivided. The difference in Rambam's understanding between spirituality and physicality is that true spirituality cannot be subdivided. So if you're saying that God can be subdivided, you're necessarily thinking of him in physical terms, and what you're thinking of as God isn't God. And once you start putting physicality in, then how can you subdivide him? So that's one point. And he goes into that right at the beginning of Mishnah Torah, which is Torah, I think the fifth or seventh halacha, he goes and explains all of this. There's another point, which is if you start thinking of what's called polytheism, the idea that there are multiple deities in the world. There's the god of fire, the god of water, the god of rain, the god of fertility, all these different things. So the pagans thought that they could play off these different gods against each other. I'll try and appease the rain god. I'll slaughter someone or something to the god of fire, to the god of animals. Don't come and get me. It's all a matter of these different forces which are terrifying. You don't really understand and trying to play them off against each other. And they fight with each other as well. You've got all these mythologies that build up. So from the Rambam's perspective, having polytheism within God is no different to having polytheism without a God. If you think there's this thing called God, but within God there's the fire department, there's the rain department, there's the fertility department. So you start thinking of all these different buttons you press within God, you eventually deteriorate into some kind of polytheism. So you end up really no better off than you were before. And this is something quite interesting, because when you have all those discussions between Rambam and Kabbalah, often it gets into discussions about the Sephiros. The Sephiros are, again, taken at face value when discussed by many people. They sound like many parts of God, and some people say they're parts of God, or they're emanations of God, or they're midot of God. So whatever it is, or however one of them, even within the Kabbalah, they argue about exactly how to understand it. But one thing which, again, the people, what I understand, the people who the proper Kabbalah books all write is that the Sefirot understood properly do not imply any multiplicity and disunity within God. Whether it's just a matter of different midot of God, and we perceive it, I think Moshe Cordovero, as far as Pardes Rimonim, gives the example of water, which is put in different coloured cups. So to the person who's looking at it, it looks like the water's different, but really it's all the same water. That's the way he looks at it. I think the Ora talks about how really there aren't different midot, and there aren't. Without being a Kabbalist, I'm not going to go into all the different ways it's explained, but it's very important also within the Kabbalistic world, because a lot of them actually build up from the Rambam and then sort of move on from there. They all have this very important idea that also that God is one, and we can't even talk about the true unity of God, and that's sort of beyond discussion. So that is the Ikarim of Yichud Hashem. From the simple mythological point of view, which is just one God and not being many, or the more sophisticated philosophical point of view, and you can get into discussion of to what extent, or you have to worry about being considered heretic if you haven't clarified that enough, or how much you have to clarify. These are your discussions that can be had at great length. The next discussion, Sarah Shlishi, is Shilat Hagashma Umenu, removing any ideal aspect of physicality from him. So yeah, it's something which is simply in the Mishnah Torah, so we're used to now. There's one master of the universe, about who guf, that he is a body or some kind of form. So he's also out of the fold. Something which the rabbi takes this year, we'll discuss in a minute. But again, from the Rambam's understanding, if you are thinking of God, and you're davening to God, and you're relating to God, and you're thinking of some old man with a white beard up in the sky, the thing that you are communicating with or trying to connect to is a figment of your imagination. It's not the real God. For the Rambam, everything is about the relationship with God. It's an actual, real channel that is created between you and God, as we discussed earlier in Parashalek. What Hafkacha is, what Olam is. For the Rambam, is that connection you made. The more you perfect your midot, your seichel, everything else, the more you build that channel between your mind, that you're selling like him, and God. The more correct that is, the stronger Hashgacha becomes, and the more Olam Haba you automatically will inherit. Well, if you've got one of these basic points wrong, so that if you're thinking of God as some man in the sky, there's no connection to begin with. That's why it's an Ikarim. So it's nice saying, well, he's a good person, he smiles nice to people, he gives tzedakah, he wears tefillin, but he thinks God is some man up in the sky, so he doesn't have that initial connection. So, which is why the Rambam, even in Moreh Nevuchim, will say that in the same way as you teach your kids, don't go and worship idols, which is kind of basic thing that we teach our kids, so too you have to teach them that God doesn't have a body. You don't have to teach them anything sophisticated about negative theology and all the other discussions, but you have to teach them the very, very basics. Otherwise, they're going to think of God as some man in the sky, and they've never formed that basic connection. So again, we have this. So Sure.
Basic connection. What connection do you have with Hashem if you imagine him as some king with a house, just fabulous, whatever? Like, you're saying that do you have a connection or no? You don't have a connection. You realize that you don't understand anything about it.
So that's a massive discussion, because as we're going to get into, the Rambam has this idea called negative theology. The only thing we can affirm about God is what he isn't. So some people take that. So those who accuse Rambam as being one step away from atheism because he's not saying what God is and what he isn't. Truly understood, I think the accurate way of understanding Rambam is not just reading that chapter and then just making a big thing out of it. He also talks about how God has got it seen as a rotev. A rotev is it's actually a beautiful mashal. When God is the rotev of the universe, he's outside the universe, but he's always guiding it. So we have to understand and depict the fact that there is something there which is guiding it. Yes, some manhig, as he says. There's a mitzvah, there's a manhig. We just don't have the words, we don't have the terms to be able to put it into any language. But don't think anything that it is. There is something there, but I can't say anything about it. And the more I realize, we're going to get to that, but don't go down the road. Rosenzweig is saying that by negating everything, you're basically saying God doesn't exist, because before you start saying what he isn't, which is this sort of slitty, you've got the first yisod, which is what he is, it's mysterious. And really, he is, and what he says at the end of that whole discussion of negative theology is Dumiyah Tehillah. True praise and true understanding of God can be done in silence. His human language can't really, we'll talk about it in a second, human language can't really grasp in any way. So when you're using words to try and describe it, isn't going to get you anywhere. Meditating, once you've got rid of incorrect ideas and incorrect attributes, that can get you somewhere. You can grasp something. But that's, again, this is the whole first section of the Moreh Nevuchim. So that is the
one more question. I know he's going to explain whether to or to not, like uses sort of like physical language and to that. But my question is more, but maybe this is still on its own, so related to that topic, but we see sometimes commentators who discuss and let's say Rashi as far as the Muslim like who says like for example Hashem, I think did you hand is like like an
Right.
actual hand. And it's like, it sounds like, and I'm sure like there's a lot of discussion about these things, but
There's plenty. There's a whole chapter about it there.
but
But mamash doesn't mean physical. Mamash means direct or real. For example, when it says Aliyat HaNahar, like 5 parakim away in Shemot, the daughter of Paro went to sit Aliyat HaNahar next to the river, but it says Aliyat Mamash, meaning right next to it, not nearby somewhere, but right on the river. So Mamash doesn't have to mean right. Another example is I think right at the beginning of Yechezkel, where it says Yad Hashem al Yechezkel. He was overpowered, and as Rashi says, any time the term Yad Hashem is used in Tanakh, whether it says Nach or Tanakh, it's there to imply or to denote some kind of divine overpowering personality. Meaning that Yechezkel was just overpowered by his vision. He wasn't able to withstand it. He was knocked off his feet. So, got to take all the Rashis together, and yes, that's really what it is. But again, there is a whole discussion in its own right. The Rambam on this halacha rejects the Rambam. He says that it's true that God doesn't have a body, but saying he does, following the literal meaning of the Agadah, and saying God has a body, doesn't not considered a minion, not considered someone who's lost the share in Allah Bar. Right, meaning it's legitimate. It's not right, but it's not. If you just follow the simple meaning, whereas the Rambam, if you're following the simple meaning, but you've got the wrong idea of God, you're out. You're out of it. There's also a commentary on the Mishnah Torah. He tries to make like a compromise between the Rambam and the writer here. He says that for someone who, as he put it, for someone who has philosophical understanding and understands why saying God's physicality is so problematic, but then they would say that God has a body. But for someone who the Rabbit is talking about, which is a simple person who doesn't associate physicality with limitation, for example, again, for someone who is physical, is subject to physical forces in the Rambam's book at least. Which is again going back to the whole debate between Avraham Avinu and Nimrod in those midrashim. Nimrod keeps saying, "Well, fire is there, bow down to fire," and Avraham says, "I believe in the all-powerful God. So if water can put out fire, I can't bow down to fire." And Nimrod says, "Fine, bow down to water." No, wind blows away the clouds. He keeps putting it back at stage and showing there's nothing in the physical world which is completely supreme and not subject to physical forces, and that, to me, denotes the difference between our belief in God and any physicality denoted to God. So the Rambam saying that God's got so much physicality is tantamount to saying he's subject to physical forces, and that's getting into the whole polytheism and pagan way of looking at the world, which is why I think he says it's so problematic. So I think that is what the Chavanich is doing there, saying that someone who understands the implications of saying God is physical, for them, saying God is physical will lose an order. For someone who's taking everything to a simple level and hasn't yet got to the stage of thinking about it yet, that wouldn't be. So that's take it or leave it.
So if you just went with this idea, I think the last I looked at this, but I seem to remember that I think the Rambam talks about in the context of ideas about God, that when you're teaching your child, you explain it in terms that are relevant for where the child is. So in that case, where then is the contradiction if the Rambam is just saying that you're sort of meeting the man where he is?
So for the Rambam, that still doesn't allow you to say something positively false.
So what's really the machloket between them, if there is one?
So the Rambam would say that following the simple meaning of Tanakh and thinking that God has a body is wrong, but you don't forfeit your Shalom Abba for that.
That's a legal loophole because the literal text says this.
It's not so bad. It's bad, but it's not the sort of thing you lose on Abba by killing people. There are certain things you lose on Abba not believing Torah and Mishamayim. He doesn't think it's such a serious thing. Perhaps I think that the way I explain it and give it reclaimed, it's the Rambam looks at things already as a philosopher and says, if you are thinking of God as a physical being, you are necessarily thinking of him as someone who's subject to physical forces and limited. Whereas the Rambam is not looking at it that way and saying, no, you may just be reading the Torah at face value and you're just not thinking about it.
Is it possible it's a semantic or?
I don't think so, because how do you put the two? How do you say this kid's thinking of the man up in the sky. Rambam is saying, no, Olam Haba. He's saying, is Olam Haba. The Rambam says, clearly, you've got to teach your kids God isn't the body and he's incomparable to anything in the world. That's it. You don't have to start going into necessary existence and contingent existence and negative theology. That can wait till he's at least, 11, 12.
Do we see other places where the Rabbah's perspective, like, do you see other ramifications of this? Are there other lines coming in other areas? Or it's just
He's just on there. I'm not sure. Nothing comes to mind straight away. But again, you get kind of rather putting together his whole opinion about Ikarim, because you just see every so often he has a comment on the Rambam. You have to try and build up the whole worldview from there. It's easier to be a critic than it is to put forward it. Fine. So the Rambam in Mishnah Torah just says, if you positively go and state that God's got a body, you're in trouble. Then you're out of the fold. Rambam in the third Ikar here is saying, if you haven't fully understood that God has no physicality, you haven't yet achieved the level of one bar. But he goes further than this. Because for the Rambam, it's not just good enough to consider that God himself doesn't have a body. There are a lot of other descriptions and associations which imply God has a body. For example, taking literally, like, Hashem Ba'anan, that he came down. Coming down, like he was in one place, he moved to another, which implies, because only physical bodies move from A to B. So he goes to a whole bunch of different phrases, Yeshiva, Amida, all of these sorts of things, which you can't say about God. And if you consider them literally to be descriptions of God, you're in trouble. Or any description really at all. And again, this is definitely not something he says in Mishnah Torah, because there are the Yukim you can make in the Gemara that support it, and he does in Moranavochem. There are stories over Tanina which we discussed. You can definitely find sources for it in the Gemara, but definitely no sort of psak. If you're looking at a legalist, you can find a psak that someone who says God has attributes or can be described physically as above. There's nothing like that. So Rambam in his legal hat doesn't bring that down as a Torah. Rambam in his Ikarim gets very concerned about it. There can't be any attributes at all about God. So what exactly does this mean? Why is it so bad to say God is wise, God is strong? Right? You think these are quite good things. So the idea of negative theology, the way I think is the correct way to understand it, is it's a linguistic point. It's the fact that human language, when we use terms, any terminology we use, when we describe something, what we're automatically saying is we are fitting it into a pre-existing category that we built up in our minds of such things. So when I say Ben is a strong guy, we used to fight a lot as kids, so I know he's a strong guy, which we pulled apart our parents sometimes. So I'm saying I've met a lot of strong people in my 40 years, and Ben fits into that category of people called strong. He's not in the category of weak, he's in the category of strong. So I'm comparing him to human strength that I've come across. When I say Joel is wise, we had plenty of discussions over the months, the years. So what am I saying? Again, I'm saying I've met lots of wise people, and Joel fits into the category of wise people. So I'm comparing him to human wisdom. You argue about it. Maybe it's not a wise comparison. So when I say God is wise, Ikar Gadol, or Chacham, what am I really saying? What goes through when I boil down my statement? When I say God is strong, I know strong things in this world. I know Mike Tyson who knocks someone out and had any rounds, and God can knock people out even better than that. People are really clever; they can work out this piece of Gemara. God is even cleverer than that because he can put together. I'm putting him in a category which doesn't belong. And it's an insult, and it's incorrect, as we discussed that story of Rabbi Chanina, which is in the Gemara, which is why again the Rambam doesn't get into halacha because it's a Ragadata rather than a halachic Gemara. But he has a source here. We've got the Shliach Tzibur who gets up in Rabbi Chanina's shul and he's saying, "Okay, like Gadol, like Gibor, Banora," and he doesn't stop there. He carries on and he brings like 10, 15 different praises of God. And he finishes, everyone says to clap him off. Rav Chanina is very angry, not just because he's carried on too long, but because he said, have you finished all the praises of God? I mean, everything you've said, Kela Gadol Gibar, that's in Tanakh. The Nevi'im have said it. The Nevi'im have said about this is an appropriate way to describe him. Not that we really know what it means, but it's an appropriate way to describe him. And even then, we can only put it in our tefillah because Anshe Knesset Gedolah formulated it in the tefillah. You can't just start going making up new things. What is it like? You're like a person whose king has 10 million gold coins, and you praise him as having 10 million silver coins. Meaning, for you, that's a really good thing. You're praising him. For the king, you're insulting him. You don't have the right currency. You don't have the right currency to think of and describe God. So what can we say about God? We do find our attributes. So very briefly, he has this thing called negative theology. When I say God is wise, all the Rambam allows me to actually think I'm doing is I'm negating ignorance. God is not ignorant of anything. God is not weak. And this is not just a matter of a word game. I'm not just saying something it's the Rambam says is I've got to actually understand why it is and bring proof to the fact that God can't be more than one, that God can't be always in the human way, and why all these terms are inapplicable. And he says the difference between Shalom Melech and Moshe Rabbeinu's wisdom and their proximity to God and that of other people is that they went through life and they understood these negative points on a deeper level. So one game you can play is imagine someone who's never seen a boat before, right? You never heard of the idea of a boat, and someone says to you, "There's this thing I've just seen," and I can't make any positive statements about it. All I can do is I can say, "Well, it's not an animal. It's not round. It's not liquid." That each time I make a negative statement, I push away in your mind something which is wrong. You never actually get a grasp, a positive grasp to depict in your mind what it is, but you get closer and closer through time to what it is. So for the Rambam, that's a very, very important point, because by wrongly depicting God, you're actually not thinking of God, you're thinking of some other figment of your imagination. But with his legal hat on, as we've said, that there isn't enough of a clear legal source in the Gemara, and maybe some organic sources, there's no clear legal source in the Gemara, that they are sufficiently clear for him to be able to say in Mishnah Torah, someone that says that God is strong, blah, blah, blah. So he doesn't trust in that, he just trusts in someone that says God as a body. So that's the first. What happened to that? There's a flicking he brings those proof. Where is it gone? What does Moshe Rabbeinu say? Time anyway? So, what's the whole point of Mishnah Torah when Moshe is reviewing the events in the Midbar, it's like a history lesson to the new generation that's going to the lands. So he doesn't just tell them what happened, he tells them what happened, and each time he adds on a couple of psukim. So he said, God, you didn't have enough faith, and God gave you the mon to teach you, to teach you that humans don't just live on bread alone, but also through their faith in God and their connection to God. So he goes through each little lesson, an important excerpt from the Midbar, and he adds in what's important to know from there, basically. What does he say about Har Sinai? Right, what was going on? So Moshe says, God spoke to you from the fire. You heard some sort of communication, but very strongly emphasized. You did not see, you did not perceive any form whatsoever. This is like the takeaway. And then he gives the whole thing, well, don't make any other Zara, thinking that God has some sort of form you can replicate. And he does it again, I think, in Perek Vav. It's like the big takeaway when Moshe is reviewing the lessons of Har Sinai. Don't think that there was any kind of form or I think one pasuk is enough. So he actually brings these psukim. Right, he's saying the most actually emphasize these as the crucial lessons. Not don't think that there was any sort of physical perception or image going on. That was right. Lower Eastern called Tmuna, and that's the other prospect, right? So that is the third principle. Let's try and do one or two more quickly. Cosmos, the God precedes the whole world. So again, it's concise in this regard. I think almost any of the God wasn't there before everything else, the Tzurah and the origin of everything. These are actually pretty similar in the two, it doesn't change much. This singular God that we have discussed, who kadmon b'hechlet, is absolute first. Everything else was not kadmon relative to him. It's an interesting phrase there. Anything else other than him, bilti kadmon be'erkai cannot be considered kadmon in comparison to him. So he's obviously getting at something. So I don't know if he's talking about the angels here or the spiritual spheres. You could, so anything else that was said to be created before the world, still he was kadmon for that. Right? It could be what Rambam's getting at. Even when we say that the things that were created before, that was. Yeah. That's why he did it in negative. It wasn't kadmon there. And there are many proofs to this in the Kisei Kodesh. Ma'ana Elokei Kedem, who's what's interesting here isn't so much the comparison between Mishnah Torah and Ikarim, because in this Ikar they're pretty similar. It's interesting comparing to what he writes in Moreh Nevuchim, because there he leaves things much more open, it seems. In short, he says there's three possible ways of understanding how creation happens. A is what he says is our understanding, which is Yesh Ma'anim, God created everything from nothing. The other is Aristotle's way, which is Cosmos Olam, that the world and God were always there, and God is some kind of eternal battery giving power and not actually providentially controlling the world in any way, just sort of constantly producing it. However you go back, God was always producing the world. There was no beginning. And he says that is absolutely beyond any red line. Anyone who believes that can't believe the Torah, because God is active, he's providential, he has miracles within the world. Again, fewer than a lot of people understand, but the idea of a miracle is an absolute must. It's built into the world. So someone who says Aristotle's view is definitely out, and that's knocked out by all of this. But he has a middle ground in Moreh Nevuchim, and that is the view of Plato, which is the idea of creation from a pre-existing matter. Aeolic matter, I think it's called in Greek. The idea that there was some matter, however we understand to be, or energy, or something there beforehand, which is also eternal, like God. But God formed it into being a world. So the Rambam says in Moreh Nevuchim that there's no proof that that's the case, and it's not the simple meaning of the Torah, and therefore we shouldn't believe it. But he seems to say that one who does believe it is not one found with Ikar Emunah, because you still have God forming the world, and you can build miracles into it, and you can providentially manage it. So Rambam and Moreh Nevuchim seems to say there's not enough proof for such an approach. We don't think it's correct. But in both Mishnah Torah and his Ikar Emunah, he seems to say, no, that's no good. You actually have to believe that he's the absolute kadmon and the so-called. So whether he was writing that just to help out people who didn't have that view, or he changed his mind from one to the other, that's plenty of them to talk about. Sure. Because that matter is eternal. So we're saying he's kadmon l'chol davar. He precedes everything. And philosophically it makes a big difference, by the way, because if you say that there's some other eternal matter which isn't God, well, you start questioning, well, how did it get there? If it didn't come from God, is there some other thing which causes things to happen? It leads to a lot of complications. So I can understand why he comes back here and says it's problematic. This is what's interesting that this is his first work, his Perish the Mishnah, where he says it's a problem, you can't say that. Then, I think it's the other way around, isn't it? He did his first two works, and then the Moreh Nevuchim is his third work. That's where he says it's okay. So the Moreh Nevuchim, he used then Chozer from what he wrote here. Don't know. It's interesting one. Pirush Mishnah was first, then Mishnah Torah, and both of those he says you have to believe that God absolutely preceded everything. Moreh Nevuchim still said, well, that's the correct belief, but not believing it doesn't get you outside the Emunah. Right, he went back. We have evidence that he went back and he edited the Perish the Mishnah, but where he's corrected things. But from what we're aware, the version we have now that came down to us is the final version, because he's referred to corrections he's made, and the final version we have isn't that. So, and he's also got a letter. He's also got a letter he wrote one of to one of the rabbis in France, where he says the same thing, that you have to believe that only God knows. So is that before or after? It's something academics like writing long things about and speculating one way or the other. It's it's an open question. So yeah. So you got the Frankel version, the different manuscripts, and it's some interesting stuff there. Commentary, I think, started in his late 20s. When he was traveling, right? But he went back and edited. So yeah. I love those days. Really, when like 20s, you're really hopping in the academic career. Some of the catalysts started before they were 40. I remember here, I was really to hear today. I was 39. So you had less time to mess around next day. I think there's I'll make a point that all the different people, all the different rabbis that died before they reached 40 years ago. So it was more of a rush. Right. Still 80s.
You can also do what the Rambam did and stop sleeping. So you can also accomplish everything. Then you can also be a doctor and a scientist. You got the Netflix, you got the YouTube. Who's sleeping now?
When he's sleeping, there's an angel teaching him. I'll make it asleep. We start off on this, we'll finish off with this one today, which is a fun one. So we start off, in this one first, in the Mishnah Torah. So someone who worships some kind of stone or talisman, some sort of anything really that will be an intermediary between you and God. That comes under Avodah Zarah. That's the classic example of me and Ikarim and Gemara. So that's really safe one for the Rambam to Paskin. No controversy here. But when you get to the Yisara Chamishi, that's when it starts being fun. It's one of the arguments that comes every year when it comes to Slichas. Only God is worthy of serving and worship, and the idea is the last time saying of his greatness, not of its very stuff. But we have to do that, it means Tach of Matthias. And not anything else below him in existence. So he includes, he splits it in, angels. Now, it's prohibited to govern through an angel. Lovda and Agata and Adia. It's for Lovda. ולכן אירוע לעבדם כדי להיות אמצעים. you can't because they have no bechira, they have no mishpat, and ela bilvad yichad nemachshavot. Only to God alone must you concentrate your thoughts when you're davening. He comes up again in Sefer. You're supposed to concentrate on God, and that's to remove all other thoughts from your mind. Only God. Don't meditate on malachim. So what's interesting here is he has this in his 13 attributes and not in his Siva. Why? Because in the Gemara it's something of a controversy. And if you look at it's one very good thing the article has done in their introduction to the Slichas, they go through the different opinions on both sides of the argument about whether it's permitted or not to daven to an angel. He brings down here's the Rambam, the Ramban, the Maharal. There are a bunch of people who say no, completely prohibited. But then there are others, Shabbat Leket, Rav Albo, there are various others who say that it is permitted. And it seems there are conflicting Talmudic sources, again, not halakhic sources, but agadic sources about whether or not it's permitted. So, there's an Agadata in Yerushalmi Bracha saying how you shouldn't doesn't say to Michal, Gabriel, these other things, only to God, don't mention anything else. But then you have other Agadas, other Midrashim, other Yerushalmis that say asking the angels to bring the prayer into God, Machnise Rachamim, is a permitted thing. So you have some communities that do, some that don't, and everyone will get very excited to tell anyone else they're wrong. But what we really see is there are sources on both sides. Since neither is a clear halachic source, either way, the Rambam doesn't paskin it halacha as a matter of kfira in his Mishnah Torah, but obviously he believes that malachim are lower than God, they're separate to God, and therefore praying to anything other than God, he personally believes is wrong and puts you out of the he puts into the Ikarim. So we see time and time again, we see the 13 Ikarim representing Rambam's own understanding based on his philosophy or even his understanding of the Gemara, whereas Mishnah Torah representing what he understands to be the clear and precise conclusions of the Gemara. Something which I think runs through his halachic works as well. The way he paskins is clear and precise from the conclusions and not things he brings in his own. Fine. Okay, I'm going to leave it here. Asking them to do stuff for you. You're not praying. You're asking them to do a favor for you. Because you're believing there's a spiritual power that will do something as a result of you praying to them. There's a spiritual force there which is in charge of refuah, and instead of saying to God, who's
sometimes I pray to God, right? And I just say, notice how long they do this for me. How do I pray to God? Right? So that's just a straight request.
But that's very different. When you're asking a person to say something else, I know that God is the Almighty and within His complete power to earn a new world, and therefore I'm asking Him to make sure something gets done. When I'm asking a person to do something, it's something in the physical world. I'm not asking to change nature or to change the spiritual, anything like that, or to look at my worthiness and to judge me and say I'm unworthy of something. I'm just asking to do me a favour because some of the things I will pass it off to the Lord because I can't reach myself. I'm not saying I'm unworthy of something and my merits are being judged that I should be able to get healed from something.
It's complicated, right? Obviously, many people say that we should never pray on merits anyway.
Mention them, or when you pray, God's judging. It's always a judgment.
That's not in my prayers.
Right. So to say, I'm now going to take on to do mitzvah X, Y, Z, and in that merit, I'm asking God to cure them. I think that's all right. I think that's the time God will do that. But the difference is, as Rambam said, it doesn't happen because they're not Bar Bechira. They're not something in the what. A human being is Bechira, so you can ask them to choose to do something for you. God is a Bar Bechira, is you can ask him to choose to do something. An angel, it says, Ein Mishpat V'lo Bechira. He can't judge you, and he can only do what God has programmed him to do. That's really what Malachim according to the Rambam are spiritual forces which are programmed to enact His will in the world. But getting into the whole 10 Brachim, that's controversial. Some people don't.
Actually,
They do, especially the Baruch Huni.
saw a version of the, I think of the English, some party also following to myself. He doesn't say me melech machem, but he says melech machem. As if you're not saying melech machem is the
Interesting.
because if you say like I don't know what that means to say like the angels, but you sort of say like really I'm talking to
The question is what the angels mean and what it means to have an angel on both sides of you. As in, Chazal say that there's no right and left regarding angels; they don't have sides. So we don't have a lot written down post Christianity, so it's a difficult thing to. But there's somewhere in Tanakh where I think it's after the whole thing with Isabel and Achav, where one of the prophets has this sort of vision, and it says he sees God with his ministering angels to the right and left of him. And the Chazal says similar on the Mishnah Chuma, I think it is, the Mishnah Mechilta. What does that mean? There's no such thing as right and left in heaven. What does it mean? So it says it means the right refers to Midat Din, and the other refers to Midat Chesed, or the other way around. I don't remember now. But the idea is that there are angels, meaning spiritual entities, which are there to. I have to phrase this. And when the way that the Gemara in Shabbos talks about Shalom, when a person comes back from school and everything's set up properly, he's honored Shabbos and the meal's set up properly and the house is ready and it's a big joyous honored Shabbos great occasion. So the angel says it should be like this again next week, meaning he's trained himself to do the right thing. This is something which he's going to be spiritually encouraged, in psychology or however you want to call it, to repeat again, and the other angel has to say Amen. If he's not prepared properly for Shabbos, he's all last minute and the tables, he's not been set yet, then the negative angel will say, this is going to happen again, this bad habit's going to continue, and the good angel has to say Amen. That's one of the ways of sort of demystifying, you've got an understanding what it means in terms of Malachim, and that's yeah, again, there is some discussion about whether I don't think everyone says Rishon Leich, I'm fishing out all of it. Thanks for coming.